Okay, so we're in our chapter 47. So it seems that Israel had no greater enemy, neighbor, than the Philistines. They were neighbors. Now, who were these Philistines? You ever wonder who the Philistines are or were? It appears that the Philistines originated as part of the Sea Peoples, or a confederation of migrant groups who moved from the eastern Mediterranean during the late Bronze Age collapse. So that was from about 1200 to 1150 BC. There's different ages, of course, according to archaeologists. You have the Bronze Age, you have the Iron Age, you have the Iron Age too, and those are different periods of time. So this would be the Bronze Age, but at the end of it. Now they settled in an area south of Israel. We find that their story is a blend of biblical archaeological discoveries and we find Egyptian records. More recently, we have been given genetic evidence, which we can find the clearest picture of the scholars that are able to reconstruct in our days. So, the earliest reference of the Philistines come from the land of Egypt. So, if we look at different sources, and I would say, yes.
So that means they are basically from the Egypt. They belong to Egypt and they.
No, the Egyptians, no. The Philistines themselves are from the northern areas of the Mediterranean. So we're talking about the Aegean Sea. We're talking about, I'll get into the areas in just a moment. But the Egyptians recorded the Philistines because when the Philistines landed, and I'll get to this, but when they landed, they attacked the Egyptians first, okay? So we find in these inscriptions from the reign of Ramses III. These are Egyptian inscriptions about the Philistines. So he was the pharaoh of Egypt from 1180 to 1150 BC. So 1150, let's see, 1180 and 11, oh, sorry, 1000, yeah, 150 BC. So, so that time period, we're talking about the time period of the book of Judges. It would be before the time of King David. King David would have been around 1000 BC. Okay? So just before the time of King David, these Philistines appeared. So there was a group whom the Egyptians had called the Peliset, who appeared among the sea peoples who fought Egypt, and then they later settled in the lands of southern Canaan. So if you can imagine, so if Egypt's down here, and it kind of goes around like that, the Mediterranean goes around like that, then they started up here, they attacked the Egyptians, and then later on they lost, and then they settled just up here, north of the Sinai Peninsula, where you come into Israel proper. Okay, so that would be the area of Canaan, but southern Canaan. So we find through inscriptions that the Peliset, that's what they were called by the Egyptians apparently. They were foreigners among the Egyptians and also the Canaanites who were already living there in Canaan. These Peliset people arrived by the sea and amalgamated with other Mediterranean groups. So perhaps there were groups from Crete, people like that, but they amalgamated with them. Now, these people attempted to invade Egypt originally. That's what they attempted to do. But the Egyptians defeated them. They were soundly defeated. And so then they moved away from Egypt and they later went up there towards where Israel is. And they went to the southern part of the land of Canaan and they resettled in southern Canaan. During, therefore, many scholars identify the Peliset as the Philistines. During excavations in the Philistine cities, which they found them in Israel. There's Ashkelon, there's Ashdod, there's Ekron, there's Gath, and then finally Gaza or Gaza. So you've heard of the Gaza Strip. Well, the reason why they're named after that Gaza Strip is named after because it's named after a Philistine city. Now they revealed these archaeological excavations revealed a sudden cultural shift at around 1175 to 1150 BC, and so therefore the pottery of the Egyptians we find was an Aegean style. So this would be you know where the Aegean Sea is. You know where I'm talking about? Okay, so if you take modern day Turkey and you take Greece on the other side, the sea that's in the middle of that is known as the Aegean Sea. And so that area surrounding Turkey and Greece, their pottery was an Aegean style. Okay, so that's when they found and they went into these cities, these Philistine cities, they found Aegean style pottery. They also had new architectural styles that were not customary for the Egyptians or even the Israelis. And they had a distinctive dietary requirement. They had distinctive dietary requirements, including increased pork consumption. They ate pork, and they were involved in early ironworking. These Philistines. They had foreign burial customs, and these all point strongly to an Aegean or Southern European origin. So they were European people, the Philistines. Okay. There was a 2019 DNA study of human remains from Ashkelon, that was a Philistine city, that showed that these Philistines had genetic signatures from Southern Europe. These signatures were likely from Greece, Sardinia, and Iberia, which would be Spain and Portugal. This supports the idea of their migration from the Mediterranean West or the Aegean region into Canaan at around 1200 BC, just around the time of the book of Judges. Okay, so these people came in a little bit later. They weren't ancient people. They come in later around 1200 BC. So that was also the time of the Judges. As mentioned, after their defeat by Egypt, the Philistines settled along the southern coastal plain of Canaan. This formed a pentapolis. So have you heard of the Decapolis? Okay. So if you heard of a Decapolis, that's the cities of 10. So when I went to Jordan, there was a city called Jerash that we went to, the ruins of it, and that was a part of the Decapolis. So Deca means 10. So Penta means 5. Okay? So this is the Pentapolis, or the 5 cities of Philistia. So Philistia had 5 cities, and I'll mention to you again what they were. There's Gaza, so you've heard of Gaza, right? The Gaza Strip. There's the ancient city of Gaza. Then there's Ashkelon. Then there's Ashdod. Then there's Ekron. And finally, Gath. And that's where Goliath was from, Gath. Okay, so those are the 5 cities in the Pentapolis of Philistia. By the 10th century, or 1000 BC, these people had blended significantly, with local Canaanite populations, though they remained politically distinct. So they had their own politics. These Philistines persecuted and cursed Israel for many years, and they were under the hand of divine judgment. Okay? Because this is the Abrahamic covenant. Genesis chapter 12, verse 2 through 3. And I will make of thee, or Abraham, a great nation, which will be Israel. And I will bless thee, and make thy name great. And thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So, if you look at that just for a moment, the last part says, in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. How? How will all the families of the earth be blessed in the nation that Abraham will found?
Because Abraham has another son as well, Ishmael,
Right. Okay.
who God also promised with Hagar that, if I will
Right.
make
Yeah, but who ultimately is going to bless the world?
Ishmael.
Right. So it's Jesus. It's Jesus who's going to bring that to fruition, not the nation Israel. The nation Israel is God's hand to bring forth the Messiah or the Christ, who will bless every family on the earth. But through Abraham, and Abraham is the father of Jesus, right? Great, 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 great grandfather. And so there you have through Israel. There's the promise, and then it says, "I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curse thee." Now, my question is, so that last part is valid for today. Why can't the former parts be also valid? Because they can. Do you follow?
Are you talking about?
I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that
You
curseth thee.
talking about that is this valid or not?
Yeah, is that valid?
Valid, yes.
Yeah, it's valid, isn't it? Absolutely. So that's what I'm saying. Is that promise? Because when God makes a promise, He doesn't just halt it for a while, does He? No. So if people want to curse Israel, what will God do?
God will curse them.
That's right. He will bring a cursing upon them, and that's what you're going to see in this chapter. This is uh, a curse upon the Philistines. Now we talked about who these people were, where they came from, and how they opposed Israel, and they did. Okay, so let's get into it. So in verse 1, years before, Jeremiah had written this prophecy against the Philistines. Years before. Okay, we're going to tell you when this was written because I want you to know that this chapter didn't it wasn't written while Jeremiah was in Egypt. Okay, because we get to chapter 45 and that's like the last chapter where Jeremiah is in Egypt, right? And then after chapter 45, we go into the supplemental section. Remember I talked about that? And last week it was about Egypt. Now we're talking about the Philistines. And that chapter that was written to Egypt, I believe, was written much after than this chapter to the Philistines. This is a really early chapter in the book of Jeremiah, and it's all the way in chapter 47. So it's not necessarily chronological, is it? In the chapter divisions. So first of all, we find in this chapter 47, because you looked at it, okay, so let me read the verse to you. The word of the Lord that came to Jeremiah the prophet against the Philistines before that Pharaoh smote Gaza. So it has to be before the time that Pharaoh smote Gaza, okay? It has to be before that time. And I'll tell you when that was. But it has to be before that time. So Jeremiah had declared a prophecy against the Philistines. They had known about this prophecy against the Philistines for many years. This prophecy came much longer before Pharaoh Necho, the powerful Egyptian pharaoh that had come to attack Gaza, a Philistine city on the southern border of Philistia, and he caused it to submit entirely to Egypt. This event happened in 609 BC, so it'd have to be before 609 BC. This would mean that Jeremiah had declared this prophecy much like many years before, most likely many years in the time of King Josiah, the king of Judah, because King Josiah was killed in around 609 BC. Okay? So it had to be done, this prophecy had to be done in his day, in King Josiah's day. And likely this prophecy was done likely at the beginning of his ministry at around 627 BC. So when did Jeremiah start his prophecy? 627 BC. Okay? So here we find again that the book of Jeremiah does jump around chronologically. So you can almost say this could go to chapter 1, but it's not put in chapter 1 for a reason, because it's going to follow the chronology of the story of Jeremiah and his ministry. Then later on, these supplemental chapters will come in. But this one was written at the beginning of his ministry. Okay? So this is what I'm trying to tell you. So in verse 2, the prophet was referring to the invading Babylonians as far back as the beginning of his ministry in 627 BC. Okay? That's when Jeremiah started his ministry. Here's the verse. Thus saith the Lord, Behold, waters rise up out of the north, and shall be an overflowing flood, and shall overflow the land. What land? What land? Yeah, but it will also flow over Israel, because it will come from the north. And all that is in therein, the city, and them that dwell therein, then the men shall cry, and all the inhabitants of the land shall howl. So this prophecy is talking about someone who's coming from the north, all the way at the beginning of Jeremiah's ministry. These people are coming down to attack and destroy Philistia. But with Philistia, what will also be destroyed? Israel, exactly. So, so this also applies to Israel. This is at the beginning of Jeremiah's ministry. Once again, all this is being given at the beginning. So that's then you see and go, oh wow, okay, all right. So there would be an enemy who would be coming to destroy the Pentapolis of Philistia, those 5 cities. These Babylonian people would descend from the north. We know it's the Babylonians. Here we find a clear reference to the Babylonians themselves without giving their name, yet their identity is clear. Keep in mind that the campaign for Egypt to fight against Babylon had not happened at all during this time. The deciding battle of Carchemish would not happen until 605 BC, which was likely decades from the date of this prophecy. So if this prophecy was given in 625 BC, how many years would that be to 605? Let's do some math. 20? Yeah. So you got 20 years. Prophecy's been given. This is going to happen. Okay? So it's very likely it was decades, many years before the actual fact. We know that there would come a day when the Egyptians would join forces with the remnant of the Assyrians at Carchemish. We talked about that last week, which is located in northern Euphrates, which was within the border of Syria at the time. In 612 BC, the great Assyrian city of Nineveh was destroyed by the Babylonians and the Medes. So you have a lot of time periods here, or dates in history. 612 BC, the Assyrian city of Nineveh is destroyed by the Babylonians. And I don't know if you knew this, but the Medes went with the Babylonians. Now, the Medes worked with the Persians to destroy the Babylonians later on. But before, in 612 BC, the Medes were allied. I hope that doesn't confuse you too much. But anyway, I find that very interesting. So Nineveh falls in 612 BC. This fall caused a fatal wound to the Assyrian kingdom that would later be fulfilled by the destruction of Carchemish in 605 BC. This was located in the northern Euphrates region. The ancient site of Carchemish lies north of the border of modern Syria, a few miles north into modern-day Turkey. next to the banks of the Euphrates River. It actually stands on the north of it. The Assyrian-Egyptian coalition were soundly defeated by the Babylonians, that's in 605, and thus they began, the Babylonians that is, the empire of Babylon. So, once again, if this was given at 625 BC, 20, 20 years, do you think they were thinking about the Babylonians being the rulers of the world? No, no. Who were the rulers of the world at the time? 620 BC. The Assyrians were. The Assyrians were strong. Nineveh was still strong in those days. In 620 BC, it wasn't until 612 when Nineveh fell. Okay? So you got to think about this because it's just like anything in life. You know, you look at our country now and you think, "Oh, they're strong and everything's good," but you don't know the future. What's going to happen in 10 years? What's going to happen in 15 years? What's going to happen in 20 years? What's going to happen in 30 years? We just don't know the future, but God does. Amen. And God knew the future of what was going to happen to Philistia and also to Israel. So this is why it's so important when we look into this, because then we can see the prophecy and how it was fulfilled. We can understand that chapter 47 is actually one of the earlier prophecies of Jeremiah himself. And that makes it pretty fascinating. So so what is this? Okay. Well, the Assyrian-Egyptian coalition were soundly defeated by the Babylonians, and thus they began the empire of Babylon. Jeremiah declared that Babylon would eventually come. He described the Babylonians like an overwhelming flood that would bring to the Philistines utter destruction. So that's what a flood does. I don't know if you've ever seen. Years ago, I was watching what are they called when they a tsunami. That's right. I was watching a tsunami, and I don't know if you remember, but there was a big bad earthquake. I don't know, it was about 10 years ago, maybe it was longer than that. And it hit Japan, and I was watching this like an overhead video of as the waters flowed in, and there's people driving their cars, and then all of a sudden you just see the water's coming, and then all of a sudden it just covers that whole area, and it just knocking over houses and knocking over, and people are running, and cars are floating down the road, and it's just like wow, in just a moment, and but maybe 20 feet away or 30 feet away, people are like, oh, everything's fine, and then all of a sudden, and then they're overwhelmed, and you think about that, how people are not prepared, and something just comes, and a flood is so destructive. Something like that is so destructive. Water is destructive, and if it comes in, and it'll take things with it, and people die, they drown. It's just an awful thing, isn't it? And it's very, very destructive. And so this is what he describes the Babylonians. They're like a flood. They just come in like a flood, and they bring destruction with them. And who are they going to destroy? Well, they're going to destroy these Philistines. These Philistines are going to be destroyed. So if you ever wonder, how did the Philistines get destroyed? The Philistines that opposed David, and David and Goliath, and the Philistines. You hear about these Philistines. Well, and now we know where they come from. That they're actually of European descent. They'd come down. They settled. They attacked Egypt first. The Egyptians wrote about them, and then they went up to southern Canaan, and they built 5 cities, and those are the five, the Pentalopolis of the Philistia, and they became bitter enemies of the Jews, and of course they're serving this god Dagon and different other things. They're pagans. That's what they are, and it just seems like they're a displaced people. You know what I mean? They don't really look like they should be there. Sort of why the Egyptians won't have them, and they kind of get stuck in the middle between Egypt and Israel right there. So this is where you have with these people. So they're going to be destroyed by these Babylonians. Verse 3. The Babylonians would fearfully come with chariot and horse. They would come with chariot and horse. So when you think of a chariot and a horse in the ancient culture, nowadays you think, oh, a chariot and horse, that's nothing. We have tanks. Well, back in those days, they didn't have tanks. They didn't have artillery like that. So what would they think about? What would be fearful for them? Do you think it would be very fearful if they charged you with a bunch of horses? Yeah, it's very scary if you're standing there with your spear and they're coming at you with a horse. Yeah, what are you gonna do? Ah, run for your life, or a chariot coming after you. It's very very fearful. So and they make a lot of noise. So here it is. At the noise of the stamping of the hoofs of the strong horses, and at the rushing of his chariots, that loud rushing sound of all those wheels turning, and the rumbling of his wheels, the fathers shall not look back to their children for feebleness of heart. Yeah, feebleness of hand. Sorry. So so when the horses and chariots would arrive from Babylon, all the people would run in fear. So now he's seeing it as a vision. He's actually going in and he's looking at it, and he can see this vision of these chariots and these horses coming after these Philistines or entering into their cities, and the rumbling and all the sound that he's hearing, and hearing the screams of the people. I mean, their fear would be so great that the fathers would flee without taking thought of rescuing their wives and their families. They wouldn't even go back into the city. They're just going to run. This day would be an every man for himself scenario. All hands on deck, we're all running, every man for themselves, Yeah, you just run. So Jeremiah prophesied here a picture of utter hopelessness and shock. This is how the Philistines are ending. They're just utter hopelessness and shock. The Babylonians are coming, and they're going to bring fear. So on that day, the Philistines would have no ally that would be able to come to their aid. Because of the day that cometh to spoil all the Philistines, and to cut off from Tyrus and Zidon every helper that remaineth. For the Lord will spoil the Philistines, the remnant of the country of Caphtor. Caphtor, interesting. Caphtor, what's Caphtor? We'll get into that. I'll explain it to you. Okay, but first of all, let's talk about help. So where would their help come from? Anybody going to help them? The Philistines have any allies? Well, they did. They did. They had some allies. They had the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians. That's Tyre and Sidon. They had a shipping industry. They had trading. They were traders. The Phoenicians were traders, and they were good at it. And yet, these people, these Phoenicians, would they come and help them? Would they bring their armies? They had armies of mercenaries. Would the Phoenicians send their mercenary armies and help the Philistines, their allies, the Philistines that enriched the Phoenicians? Because they did. These people had traded with the Philistines for centuries. These Phoenicians, they were enriched by the Philistines. The major train route, you can see, as they go into Egypt, back and forth to Egypt, they would go through Philistia. I'm sure they had a port there. They probably had a port in Gaza. And they would trade with the Egyptians, and they would trade with the Phoenicians, and everybody was happy, and everybody was making a lot of money, because that was the major trade route to Egypt. It passed straight through the land of the Philistines. But on their day of destruction, the Phoenicians would not have any power to assist them. For the Phoenicians would have already been subdued by the Babylonians by that time, because you see the Babylonians came from the north. So where would they naturally attack first? Where would they come? And so if they start way up, they come up the Euphrates, and they come up to Hamath of Syria. Now they're going to go south, because that's straight down to Israel. So on the way to Israel, are they going to just let all the other people go? No, of course not. They're going to attack the Syrians. They're going to completely subdue Syria, and then they're going to go into Lebanon, and they're going to go to Tyre, and they're going to Sidon, those seaport cities with their wealth and their mercenary troops and their castles and everything. And Nebuchadnezzar is going to come in. He's going to attack the Tyre. And the Bible tells us that he did. He went for Tyre, and he went for Sidon, and he subdued them. Now, the people of Tyre, they actually went out on an island, and they were able to live in an island until Alexander the Great destroyed them. But all the people that were on the coastline, they were destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? So he destroyed the people of Tyre. So that would mean the Philistines wouldn't have an ally? Exactly. They did not have an ally. The Phoenicians could not help them. They had already been subdued by the Babylonians. So the prophet referred to the Philistines by their ancient original title, which is Caphtor. So Caphtor is the ancient original title of the Philistines. These were people who had originally come from many European, southern Canaan. They were therefore competitors for the entire land of Canaan. Does that sound like anything that's going on in the world today? Anybody that's a competitor for the land of Israel? Because that's what the Philistines were. They didn't just want southern Canaan, did they? Did they? No, they wanted all of it. And in order to have all of it, what did they have to do? Push the Jews into the sea. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, it does sound familiar, actually. Okay. So no help came to help the Philistine. Am I right? No, no help came. Okay. So their destruction will be a time of great mourning and distress. Once again, the early prophecy about the Philistines, verse 5, baldness is come upon Gaza. Ashkelon is cut off with the remnant of their valley. How long wilt thou cut thyself? God asks these people. Sounds like they're going through great mourning. He even talks about the topography here, about a valley and their valley. I just find that interesting. Okay. So baldness would come to the Philistines. The baldness would be a metaphor for a sure and final destruction of Philistia as it was known. Many would follow a pagan custom. They would cut and shave their heads for the dead. This was something that God had forbidden for his people in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 28. They were not supposed to cut their heads and shave their heads for the dead because it was a pagan custom. And the Philistines, of course, followed the pagan custom. They were pagans. Okay. Yeah, that's what it means. It means they're just completely desolate. There's nothing left. And so all they can do is cry out and mourn.
So he's using an imagery of how they shave their heads to, like if you shave your head and you cut yourself, like surely if you've shaved your head enough times, you shouldn't cut yourself. Surely they should have learned when their land started getting laid, or don't keep on causing this on yourself. And they're basically bringing on this.
Yeah, they so like people do. Yeah, yeah. So is this anything old, or I mean, really? I mean, it's kind of new, isn't it? People just destroying themselves. Okay, so verse 6 through 7. When would that final day come when the sword would be sheathed in peace for the Philistines? They would ask. So in other words, this war would be so bad that they would be wishing for the end of it, but it would not come. Does that sound familiar? Verse 6 and 7. O thou sword of the Lord, how long will it be ere thou be quiet? So who ultimately is bringing the judgment upon the Philistines? Was it the Babylonians? No, it's the Lord. The Lord is allowing the Babylonians to bring destruction. But it's his hand. Put up thyself into thy scabbard, rest and be still, they're saying. How can it be quiet, seeing the Lord hath given it a charge against Ashkelon and against the seashore? There hath he appointed it. So he's not going to put it away, is he? So the Philistines.
So they knew this prophecy was against them.
Yeah, well, yeah, and think about This is many years before all this began to take place. So I'm going to talk a little bit about their repentance, about the Philistines' repentance. Okay? So the Philistines would be crying out for peace and security from the Lord. I think they knew that not far away was something very special. But before we get to that, think about how these Philistines felt when the war came. They would feel that the war would seem endless for these people. Just endless, never ending. Yet how could God bring peace to a people who had defiled themselves and were currently in a terrible state of idolatry and unrepentance? Could he get them right? He could not. The Philistines would continue to struggle and to sink until these people would be amalgamated into Israel by the in the time of the Maccabees in the 2nd century BC. So they were talking about the year 160 BC. And that was known as the Hasmonean kingdom. That's the time of the Hasmoneans, just after the Maccabees. So have you heard of the Seleucid king? Okay, Antiochus Epiphanes. He went in. He caused a great problem for the Jews. It was in around 163 BC. His reign of terror started in 170 BC and went to 163. 7 years of terror. Very interesting. It's like a tribulation.
Were the Philistines wiped out?
The who?
The Philistines. Were they wiped out?
So what they did was, and we actually find, I believe it's in the book of Zechariah, where Zechariah talks about the last remnant of the Philistines actually amalgamating into Israel. So there was some.
Samaria.
No, they weren't in Samaria. They were south. They were south of Israel in the area of the Negev Desert. Okay, so it's very deserty down there. I've been down to the Negev Desert. It's deserty. It's very barren. Okay, and this is where these Philistines live. Now they live closer to the sea, so probably be more vegetation there. I didn't really I haven't really gone to that side of Israel yet. I haven't gotten to. Well, that's kind of like by the Gaza Strip, so I wasn't really too keen on going that way.
Philistines, one of those people that God said to Israel, "We must destroy them."
No, that's the Amalekites. I believe you're thinking of.
Okay.
Yeah. The Philistines, God did show some mercy on the Philistines, and that's interesting. But
I always thought the Philistines, it was intended that they should be wiped out as one of the peoples in Canaan, and that they just kept on coming back, causing problems for Israel. We should have dealt with them in the beginning.
well, the truth is they weren't completely wiped out, but as far as a culture and an ethnicity, that would completely disappear from the annuals of history. But if you meet, there might be some Jewish people that you might meet that will have a Philistine background and they don't even know it because it goes back a long time. Okay? That's when they were amalgamated in Israel. Because we're talking about 160 BC. Okay? So can you imagine how many families that would be till today? So they were amalgamated. But they lost their whole identity as Philistines. That was gone. It was over. So so these Philistine people had many years to reform themselves, but they hung on to their idolatry to the bitter end. And I just want to talk a little bit about that in closing, okay? And then I may mention a few other things to you also, just to give you some food for thought. So Philistia serves as an object lesson, okay, of what happens to an unrepentant nation that had a neighborhood, had neighbored a people who were founded by God. The Philistines were neighbors to Israel. These neighbor people could have gone and investigated the truth of God's word and why he called Israel and had given them his word. These people even tried to kidnap the Ark of the Covenant in the book of 1 Samuel. Now remember, I went to Shiloh and did an archaeological dig for a day. Shiloh was the place of where the temple was, or where the tabernacle was, the tabernacle of Moses. When Joshua came into the land, they set up the tabernacle in Shiloh, it says. And so that's where the priests live, and then they had the tabernacle there. And then the Philistines came and they destroyed Shiloh. This is what history tells us, but the Bible doesn't tell us exactly what happened to Shiloh. But we know that Shiloh was destroyed because there are prophets that make reference to Shiloh, even Jeremiah himself. Okay? But what the Philistines did was when they won the battle against Israel in the book of 1 Samuel, they took the ark, didn't they? And they took the Ark of the Covenant and traveled to the temple of Dagon and set it up in the temple of Dagon. And what happened to Dagon?
The statue fell off and broke into pieces.
At first, it just fell over the first night. And then they set it up again. And then the next day, they came back and the statue had fallen down again, and the head was broken and the hands were broken. The statue. And so it was worse the second day. And then they got smoked with these what they called emerods, this terrible boil disease, and people were dying all over the place. And one of they would go to the next city of Philistia, and the Pentapolis, and they're like, no, don't send it here, by then they were like, send it home, send it back. And so they sent the ark back to
On a cart with two oxen and no.
exactly. Now you're getting me. And remember, they went through Bethshemesh, and then when they came to Bethshemesh, which is there in the western part in the valley of Sharon, the Sharon Valley. I didn't get to go over there, but anyway, Bethshemesh. I did go to Elah, though. I did see the valley of Elah. But anyway, so they went to Bethshemesh, and when they got to Bethshemesh, they killed the oxen, sacrificed them, took the wood, used it for a fire, and then they looked into the ark and died. So that wasn't wise. But anyway, what we find is the Philistines were involved a lot with things of God, and they were also warned, and they saw the power of God. They were close to the things of God. They witnessed David miraculously killing Goliath. You think a lot of Philistines on that day, when they see this little guy coming out with a slingshot and kills him and you think, wait a minute, this doesn't look right. There's something wrong with this picture, right? So what do you think Philistines would have done if wouldn't they get right with God? And yet they never did. They continued blindly to fight on against the truth. They kept fighting against the people of God. Now, how far were their camps from Jerusalem? Not far. What we'd say, maybe 50 miles from the temple in Jerusalem for years. Why didn't they go up and inquire and look into these things? They were people right on the border. They could have gone to Israel and learned about the things of God. And even they later did. There were people that were Philistines that later, like I said, amalgamated into Israel. But this is years later. You're talking about nearly 1,000 years later. It's crazy. And you think, well, why didn't these people get right? And I was thinking that people fight the truth today. They live right next to a church that preaches the gospel, and they won't go into it. They won't check it out. They won't inquire. They won't look into things. So is this human nature? I mean, now their foolishness, it would lead to their own destruction, and it did, and now we have to ask the question, where are the Philistines today? Where are they? And will the world of today ever learn what happens to those who fight against the things of God? Because this is ultimately what you learn from those 7 verses, is they fought against the things of God, and in the end they lost. Now, this isn't in my notes, but the Roman emperor named Hadrian, you've heard of Hadrian's Wall and all that. Hadrian, in 130 AD 130, he fought against the Jews in Jerusalem It's known as the Bar Kokhba Revolt. A bunch of soldiers got killed, Roman soldiers. Hadrian lost his temper. He sent all these soldiers in, and he says, we're going to wipe out the Jews. We're just going to finish this. And he was very effective. He went into Israel, and he killed 500,000 Jews. Dead. Gone. Okay? Then he took the city of Jerusalem. He burned it down. And then he took the ruins of Jerusalem, and he built a Roman city over it, known as Aelia Capitolina. And then he took the temple, and he wiped it clean. There was not one rock on the temple, not one stone, not anything, just like Jesus said, not one stone upon another. Every stone would be thrown down. That is exactly what happened in 130 AD. Then, after he did that, after he wiped out, he only allowed the Jews to come to Jerusalem once a year. It was in the summertime. I don't remember what day it is, but it's in the summertime, and it's the day when the temple was destroyed. The day when they destroyed the temple in AD 70, the Jews later on would come to Jerusalem and they would mourn over that. And they still do, by the way. They still do this. They mourn over the destroyed temple that was built. Well, it was built, the second temple, they call it. Okay? And they mourn over the first temple destruction as well. But anyway, then after he did all this, after Hadrian did all this, he renamed the province area Syria, Palestina. Now, if you ever wonder where the name Palestine comes from, it's actually Latin for Philistine. There were no Philistines. There's no Philistine people. When he named that area Palestine, there were no Philistine people. Then later, when the British took over Palestine in 1917, they called it Palestine.
But Palestine was a geographical
It
area,
was.
not a country.
That's right.
Not a.
It included
All of Jordan.
Yes, it included the whole area that the British took over from 1917 to 1948. You have Israel proper was part of Palestine, and then you have Jordan over to the, you go across the river, and then you have Jordan to the east. Okay, that was all Palestine. That was just one area of Palestine. The British were over that. And when I went to Jordan, I noticed these roads are British. Even the signs are British. Even the plugs were British. Everything was British. You know, it was like, wow, I'm in England. You know, when I was in Jordan, I felt like that. Even more than when I was in Israel, I felt like I was in England when I was in Jordan. And so it's pretty interesting because the British had so much influence over that area. So now you have this thing called Palestinian people. Do you realize all the people that lived in Palestine were called Palestinians? And did you realize that the Jews even had a Palestinian post?
Post office.
It was a Jewish newspaper.
Orchestra as well.
They had an orchestra known as the Palestinian. There's never been a Palestinian language, culture, money system. There's no, or anything. They're just Arabs. So to call them Palestinians, you really need to look it up. It's a modern invention. It started really when Yasser Arafat started the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. That he wanted to liberate Palestine from every Jew. And you can look it up yourself. But I find that very interesting that when people oppose people oppose Israel, what does God say? I will bless them that bless thee, and I will curse them that curse thee. All right.